The congressional hearing room fell dead silent as pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author Joel Osteen slowly pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase. Lawyer Sally Yates, former acting U.S. Attorney General and a nominee for U.S. Attorney General, sat frozen in her chair, her face turning pale as she recognized the document being held up for the entire room to see. "Ms. Yates," Osteen said, his voice steady, yet laden with a profound sense of gravity. "Before we continue, I believe the American people, and indeed all people of faith, deserve to see what has been hidden." The C-SPAN camera zoomed in as Osteen raised the document higher. Yates's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. What happened next would become one of the most explosive moments in congressional hearing history. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, if you're watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what happens when moral conviction clashes with political power in real time. Trust me, you'll want to see every second of what's about to happen. Yates stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is an ambush," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't just—" "I can and I will." Osteen interrupted, his eyes never leaving Yates's face. "The American people have a right to know who they're confirming as the nation's top law enforcement officer." The tension in the room was electric. Senate Judiciary Committee members leaned forward in their seats. Reporters in the gallery frantically typed on their phones. And millions of Americans watching live witnessed something they'd never seen before. Lawyer Sally Yates, the woman known for her composure under pressure, completely losing control. To understand why this moment was so explosive, you need to know who these two individuals are and what brought them to this confrontation. Lawyer Sally Yates had built her reputation as a highly respected prosecutor and public servant, serving as acting U.S. Attorney General. She was known for her integrity, her adherence to the rule of law, and her principled stands. At 63 years old, with her silver hair neatly styled and her sharp blue suit projecting authority, she had walked into that hearing room expecting tough questions, but nothing she couldn't handle. After all, she'd been through this before. She knew the game. But Joel Osteen was no ordinary opponent. At 60, the pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author had amassed a global following. While not a politician, Osteen had a reputation for reaching millions, for his calm demeanor, and for his message of hope. His decision to delve into the murky waters of a confirmation hearing was unprecedented. He didn't grandstand. He didn't ask questions he didn't already know the answers to. And through a privately funded, extensive investigation, he had spent weeks preparing for this moment, driven by what he called a moral imperative for truth and transparency. The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about confirming another cabinet position. The Attorney General oversees the Justice Department, the FBI, the DEA, and every federal prosecutor in the country. They decide which cases to pursue and which to drop. They set the tone for law enforcement across America. And with the country more divided than ever, whoever held this position would shape the future of American justice. Yates had come prepared with her talking points. She knew Republican senators would grill her about her past policy decisions and her views on the Justice Department's independence. She expected questions about her stance on various legal issues. She had practiced answers for all of it. What she hadn't expected was for Osteen to have obtained a document that she thought had been destroyed years ago. The hearing had started normally enough. Republican senators lobbed softball questions praising Yates's record of public service. She smiled, thanked them, and gave polished answers about upholding the Constitution and serving all Americans equally. Democratic senators pressed harder, asking about her plans for the Justice Department, her views on presidential immunity, and whether she would act as the president's personal lawyer or America's lawyer. Yates handled it all smoothly, too smoothly, Osteen thought, watching from his designated seat, having been granted special permission to present findings to the committee. He had seen this performance before, the careful non-answers, the practiced deflections, the way Yates's smile never quite reached her eyes when she talked about equal justice under law. That's when Osteen decided it was time to reveal what his team, funded through an anonymous grant to a nonprofit he advised, had uncovered after weeks of investigation, a document that would change everything. The document Osteen held was dated March 15, 2013. It was an internal memo from Yates's time in a senior prosecutorial role, marked confidential, attorney's eyes only. How Osteen's team had obtained it was a mystery that would fuel speculation for weeks, but its contents were undeniable. "Ms. Yates," Osteen began, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. "Do you recognize this document?" Yates's jaw tightened. "I would need to see it closer to—" "It's your signature at the bottom, isn't it?" Osteen interrupted, holding the paper up to the camera. "Your distinctive signature that you've used on thousands of documents throughout your distinguished career." The room held its breath. Yates's attorney leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but she waved him off. Her face had gone from pale to flushed red. "Mr. Osteen," Yates said, trying to regain control, "I don't know how you obtained what appears to be a confidential document from my office, but how I obtained it is less important than what it says." Osteen shot back, his voice unwavering. He turned to address the room and the cameras. "This memo, signed by Ms. Yates, explicitly instructs her staff to, and I quote, prioritize cases involving donors over $25,000 to the Attorney General's campaign and deprioritize cases that might negatively impact major Republican fundraisers." Gasps echoed through the hearing room. Senators who had been checking their phones suddenly looked up. The gallery erupted in whispers until the committee chair banged his gavel. "That's taken completely out of context," Yates shouted, standing up again. "That memo was about resource allocation during a budget crisis. You're deliberately misrepresenting—" "Am I?" Osteen pulled out another paper. "Because I also have emails from your staff expressing concerns about this directive." One prosecutor wrote, and I quote, "This feels like we're selling justice to the highest bidder. I didn't become a prosecutor to protect rich donors." Yates's face contorted with rage. "Those emails were obtained illegally. This is a witch hunt. You're trying to smear me with documents that have no verification, no chain of custody." "Are you denying you wrote this memo?" Osteen asked calmly. "I'm saying you're taking things out of context to score political points." Yates's voice had risen to nearly a shout. Senator John Harrison, a Republican from Alabama, tried to intervene. "Mr. Osteen, these surprise documents haven't been vetted by the committee. This is highly irregular." "What's irregular?" Osteen responded without missing a beat. "Is a potential attorney general who put a price tag on justice. The American people deserve to know if the person who will oversee federal law enforcement believes justice should be different for political donors." Yates slammed her hand on the table. "That is absolutely not what that memo said or meant. You're twisting words, manipulating facts." "Then explain it," Osteen challenged. "Explain to the American people why you instructed your staff to fast-track investigations involving major donors while putting other cases on the back burner." The back and forth continued, each exchange more heated than the last. Yates tried to explain that the memo was about managing limited resources and ensuring high-profile cases that could bring in more funding for the office were handled efficiently, but every explanation sounded worse than the last. "So you admit," Osteen pressed, "that you considered the financial implications of cases when deciding which ones to pursue?" "Every attorney general has to consider resources." "That's not what I asked. Did you or did you not prioritize cases based on the political and financial connections of the people involved?" Yates's lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to get her to sit down, but she shook him off. "I prioritize cases based on their impact on public safety and the likelihood of successful prosecution." "Then why?" Osteen pulled out yet another document. "Do I have a case file here of a major donor accused of fraud that was closed without investigation, while a similar case involving a small business owner who had criticized you publicly was pursued aggressively?" The evidence kept piling up. Osteen's team had done their homework meticulously. He produced document after document, each one more damaging than the last. There were emails between Yates' staff discussing how to handle sensitive cases involving political allies. There were statistics showing a clear pattern of favorable treatment for major Republican donors. There were testimonies from former prosecutors who had left Yates' office because they felt pressured to consider politics over justice. With each revelation, Yates grew more agitated. Her composed facade cracked completely. She accused Osteen of conducting a political hit job, of using stolen documents, of trying to destroy her reputation with lies and distortions. But Osteen remained calm and methodical. "Ms. Yates, I'm simply asking you to explain your own words, your own signature, your own decisions. If you can't defend them, perhaps you shouldn't be America's top law enforcement officer." The tension reached a boiling point when Osteen revealed the most damaging document yet, It was a transcript of a phone call between Yates and a major donor, recorded by the donor himself, and later provided to investigators when he was charged with corruption. In this call, Osteen said, reading from the transcript, "You told Mr. Richardson, and I quote, 'Don't worry about the investigation. My people know what to do. You've been too good to us for this to become a problem.'" Ms. Yates, what exactly did you mean by that? Yates's face had gone from red to purple. That call was taken out of context. You don't have the full conversation. This is character assassination. Then provide the full context, Osteen challenged. Explain what you meant. The American people are watching. Republican senators tried to come to Yates's defense. Senator Mitchell from Texas accused Osteen of ambush tactics and playing gotcha politics. Senator Williams from Florida called for a recess, saying the documents needed to be properly reviewed before the hearing could continue. But the damage was being done in real time. Every major news outlet was broadcasting the exchange live. Social media exploded with clips of Yates's increasingly desperate attempts to explain away the evidence. The hashtag Yates meltdown started trending within minutes. "This is exactly why the American people don't trust Washington," Yates suddenly shouted, pointing at Osteen. "You sit here with your stolen documents and your political theater trying to destroy anyone who doesn't agree with your agenda." "Miss Yates," Osteen replied coolly, "I'm trying to ensure that the person who oversees justice in America actually believes in blind justice. Your record suggests otherwise." "My record is impeccable," Yates shot back. "I prosecuted corrupt politicians from both parties. I took on pill mills and human traffickers. I fought for victims' rights. And you also," Osteen held up another document, "dismissed cases against 3 major donors who were later convicted in other jurisdictions. How do you explain that?" The committee chair, Senator Roberts, tried to restore order, but the hearing had devolved into chaos. Yates's supporters were shouting that this was unfair, that Osteen had ambushed the nominee with unverified documents. Yates's critics were demanding more time to review the evidence, calling for the confirmation to be delayed. Through it all, Osteen sat calmly, occasionally pulling out another document from his seemingly endless folder. Each one was like another nail in the coffin of Yates's confirmation chances. "Ms. Yates," Osteen said during a brief moment of quiet, "there's one more document I'd like to show you." Yates's eyes widened with what looked like genuine fear. "What now?" she asked, her voice hoarse from shouting. Osteen pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a sworn affidavit from James Morrison, your former chief deputy. Would you like me to read what he says about your office's handling of political cases?" That's when Yates snapped completely. "Enough!" Yates screamed, slamming both hands on the table with such force that her water glass tipped over, sending water cascading across the desk. "I will not sit here and be subjected to this kangaroo court." The room fell silent for a moment, everyone stunned by the outburst. Even Osteen seemed momentarily taken aback, but he quickly recovered. "Ms. Yates, no one is forcing you to stay, but if you leave now, the American people will draw their own conclusions about your fitness for office." Yates stood up, her whole body shaking with rage. "You want me to respond to stolen documents, to affidavits from disgruntled employees, to recordings taken out of context? This isn't a confirmation hearing. It's a public execution. It's accountability," Osteen replied. "Something you should be familiar with if you want to be Attorney General." The affidavit from James Morrison was devastating. Morrison had been Yates's right-hand man for 5 years before resigning in 2017. His sworn statement detailed a pattern of political interference and prosecutorial decisions that went far beyond what the other documents had suggested. Osteen began reading. Mr. Morrison states, "I witnessed Ms. Yates personally intervene in at least 12 cases where the subjects were major political donors or allies. In one instance, she ordered prosecutors to drop charges against a developer who had donated $100,000 to her campaign, despite overwhelming evidence of fraud." "That's a lie," Yates shouted. "Morrison was fired for incompetence. He's bitter and making things up." "He wasn't fired," Osteen corrected. "He resigned, and I have his resignation letter here where he cites ethical concerns about the political direction of the office as his reason for leaving." Yates's lawyer stood up. "Senator Roberts, I request an immediate recess. These allegations need to be properly reviewed." "Sit down, counselor," Yates snapped at her own lawyer. She turned to face Osteen directly. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you've destroyed me with your little folder of papers?" "I think the evidence speaks for itself," Osteen replied. "Evidence? You call this evidence? It's a smear campaign orchestrated by those who can't accept that they lost the election. You're so desperate to stop President's agenda that you'll stoop to anything. Senator Harrison tried again to defend Yates. Mr. Osteen, these are serious allegations that deserve proper investigation, not trial by ambush in a confirmation hearing. I agree they deserve investigation, Osteen said, which is why I'll be referring all of this to the Inspector General. But the question before us today is whether someone with this record should be confirmed as Attorney General. Yates laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. You've already made up your mind. All of you on that side of the aisle made up your minds the moment the president nominated me. This whole thing is just theater for the cameras. If it's theater, Osteen said, then you're the one providing the drama. I'm simply presenting documents and asking questions. Your reactions speak volumes. That's when Osteen delivered the killing blow. He pulled out one final document, holding it up for everyone to see. This, Ms. Yates, is a check, a personal check from you to a private investigator dated 2 weeks ago. The memo line says, Opposition Research, J.O. Those are my initials. You hired someone to dig up dirt on me before this hearing, didn't you? The room erupted. Senators were shouting over each other. The gallery was in chaos. The committee chair was banging his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. Yates stood frozen, her face a mask of shock. How did you get this? The same way you tried to get information on me, except I used legal methods, Osteen said. The private investigator you hired, he used to work for a federal agency. He remembered what you did to cases involving donors. He came to us with this check and a full statement about what you asked him to do. The revelation was staggering. Not only had Yates allegedly corrupted justice in her prior roles, but she had tried to do the same thing to prepare for her confirmation hearing. You hired him to find dirt on committee members, Osteen continued, his voice rising for the first time. You wanted to blackmail or intimidate us into supporting your confirmation. Is this the kind of Attorney General America needs? Someone who uses investigators as weapons against political opponents? Yates's lawyer grabbed her arm. We're leaving now. But Yates shook him off one more time. She leaned into the microphone, her voice low and venomous. You think you're so clever, Osteen? You think you're some hero exposing corruption? But you're just another political hack playing games with people's lives and reputations. Ms. Yates, Osteen replied, standing up himself. No, I'm a citizen of this nation, doing my moral duty to advise and consent on presidential nominations. If you can't handle scrutiny of your record, you have no business being Attorney General. The two stood facing each other across the hearing room, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every camera in the room was focused on them. Millions of Americans were watching live as this unprecedented confrontation reached its climax. You want to know the truth? Yates said, her voice cracking. The truth is that every Attorney General makes tough decisions about resource allocation. Every prosecutor has to consider the bigger picture. But you wouldn't understand that because you've never held executive office. You've never had to make the hard choices. The hard choice, Osteen responded, is doing the right thing, even when it costs you politically. The hard choice is treating everyone equally under the law, regardless of their bank account or political connections. That's a choice you failed to make repeatedly. Yates grabbed her papers, shoving them roughly into her briefcase. I'm done here. This isn't a hearing. It's a circus. And you? She pointed at Osteen. You're the ringmaster. Ms. Yates, Senator Roberts called out. If you leave now, you're effectively withdrawing from consideration. Yates paused at the door, turning back to face the committee one last time. Her face was a mixture of rage and defeat. I'm not withdrawing. I'm refusing to participate in a sham proceeding where the outcome was decided before I ever sat down. The president will hear about this. The American people will hear about this. And Mr. Osteen. She looked directly at her adversary. This isn't over. With that, lawyer Sally Yates stormed out of the hearing room, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. Her lawyers scrambled to follow her, along with several Republican senators who rushed after her, trying to convince her to return. The hearing room sat in stunned silence for several seconds. Then the dam broke. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Senators huddled in groups discussing what had just happened. The gallery erupted in conversation, and Joel Osteen sat down slowly, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Senator Roberts banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. The committee will take a 30-minute recess, he announced, though his voice was barely audible over the chaos. As Osteen gathered his documents, Senator Elizabeth Warren approached him. That was incredible, she said quietly. Where did you get all of this? Weeks of investigation, Osteen replied. Former employees who were tired of staying silent. Documents that were supposed to be destroyed, but weren't. And a little help from someone with a conscience. You know there will be backlash. Warren warned. They'll come after you hard for this. Osteen nodded. I know, but someone had to do it. We can't have an attorney general who thinks justice is for sale. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, Yates was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Her face was still flushed with anger as she pushed through them. Ms. Yates, are you withdrawing your nomination? What about the allegations of political interference? Did you really hire a private investigator to research committee members? She ignored them all, marching toward the exit with her entourage, struggling to keep up. But just before she reached the doors, she turned to face the cameras. What you witnessed in there was a coordinated attack by those who will stop at nothing to obstruct the president's agenda. Mr. Osteen used stolen documents taken out of context to assassinate my character. This is why Americans hate Washington. This is why they voted for change. And mark my words, the truth will come out. With that, she left the building, getting into a waiting black SUV that sped away from the Capitol. Back in the hearing room, the committee reconvened, though Yates's chair remained conspicuously empty. Senator Roberts addressed the room. Given Ms. Yates's departure and the serious nature of the allegations raised today, I move to postpone any vote on this nomination pending a full investigation of the documents presented by Mr. Osteen. Motion passed unanimously, even Republicans agreeing that the allegations needed to be investigated. Osteen had effectively derailed Yates's confirmation, at least temporarily. But the real victory wasn't just procedural, it was the principle that had been established, that even nominees of a popular president would face real scrutiny, that past actions would have consequences, and that justice couldn't be bought or sold. As the hearing concluded, Osteen made one final statement. Today, we saw what happens when someone who has abused power is confronted with the truth. They don't defend their actions. They attack the messenger. They don't provide explanations. They storm out. The American people deserve better from their attorney general. They deserve someone who will stand up to scrutiny, who will answer tough questions, and who believes that justice is blind, not for sale. Within minutes of Yates's dramatic exit, the political world exploded. Yates' meltdown became the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Within 15 minutes, cable news networks immediately cut to special coverage with panels of experts analyzing what had just happened. On CNN, legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin called it the most dramatic confirmation hearing collapse in modern history. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow dedicated her entire show to breaking down each document Osteen had presented. Even Fox News, typically supportive of the president's nominees, had to acknowledge the damage. This was a disaster, Fox News host Tucker Carlson admitted on air. Whether the allegations are true or not, Yates's reaction made her look guilty. You don't storm out of a confirmation hearing if you have nothing to hide. The White House initially remained silent, but as the hours passed and the political damage became clear, they had to respond. President tweeted, "Lawyer Sally Yates was ambushed by radical swash Joel Osteen with fake documents and lies. This is a witch hunt worse than anything I faced. Sally Yates is a great attorney and will be vindicated." But behind the scenes, sources reported that President was furious. Not at Osteen, but at Yates for not handling the situation better. He expected her to fight back smarter. One White House insider told reporters, "Walking out made her look weak, and he hates weakness." The documents Osteen had presented were immediately scrutinized by media outlets and legal experts. Within hours, investigative journalists had confirmed the authenticity of most of them. Former employees of the relevant federal office came forward to corroborate the patterns of behavior described in the document. James Morrison, whose affidavit had been so damaging, gave an exclusive interview to 60 Minutes that aired 3 days later. "I stayed quiet for years," he said, looking directly into the camera. "But when I heard she might become Attorney General of the United States, I couldn't stay silent anymore. The things I saw in that office, justice was for sale, plain and simple." The private investigator Yates had hired also came forward, revealing that she had asked him to find anything that could be used as leverage against Democratic committee members. "She wanted dirt," he said in a sworn statement. She literally used the word dirt. She wanted something she could use to pressure them into supporting her, or at least staying quiet. Republican senators found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't defend Yates's behavior, but they also couldn't abandon a presidential nominee without facing the wrath of the president's base. Senator Harrison tried to thread the needle, saying, "While I have concerns about how this hearing was conducted, the allegations raised deserve serious investigation." Senator Susan Collins, often a swing vote on controversial nominations, was more direct. "If these documents are authentic, they raise serious questions about Ms. Yates's fitness for office. I cannot support a nomination under these circumstances." Within 48 hours, it became clear that Yates didn't have the votes for confirmation. Even if every Republican supported her, which was increasingly unlikely, she would need some Democratic support, and that was impossible. Now, Joel Osteen became a hero to progressives and a villain to some conservative pundits who viewed his intervention as politically motivated. Death threats poured into his office, but so did messages of support and admiration for his courage. He received standing ovations at various public events and was invited on every major news show. On The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Osteen explained his preparation. "I knew she would come in polished and prepared for normal questions, so I had my team dig deeper. We talked to former employees, we filed FOIA requests, we pieced together patterns from public records. The private investigator coming to us was just luck, or maybe karma." "Were you nervous?" Colbert asked. "I mean, you basically ended her career in front of millions of people." "I was nervous about getting the facts right," Osteen replied, "but I wasn't nervous about confronting her. When you have the truth on your side, you don't need to be nervous." The relevant bar associations announced they were reviewing the allegations against Yates to determine if any ethical violations had occurred during her time in public service. Several cases that had been dismissed or slow-walked during her tenure were reopened by the current Attorney General. 3 major donors mentioned in the documents were subpoenaed by congressional investigators. One of them, Richardson, whose phone call with Yates had been so damaging, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. His testimony revealed an even broader pattern of pay-to-play justice in the offices Yates oversaw. "It was understood," Richardson testified, "that if you were a major donor, your cases would be handled differently. Not dismissed outright usually, but delayed, reduced, or settled quietly. It was never explicit, but everyone knew how the game worked." A week after the hearing, lawyer Sally Yates officially withdrew her nomination. Her statement blamed partisan politics and character assassination, but notably didn't deny any of the specific allegations. She announced she would be taking a position with a private legal consulting firm, though even that offer was reportedly being reconsidered given the ongoing investigations. The president nominated someone else for Attorney General within days, but the damage was done. The new nominee faced the most rigorous vetting process in history, with senators from both parties demanding extensive documentation and transparency. The impact went beyond just this one nomination. The Osteen standard, as media outlets began calling it, became the new expectation for confirmation hearings. Senators began conducting deeper investigations into nominees' backgrounds. Whistleblowers felt more empowered to come forward with information about potential nominees' past conduct. Joel Osteen's office was flooded with documents and tips about other officials and nominees. He had to hire additional staff just to sort through all the information being sent to him, expanding his foundation's oversight mission. "This is what accountability is supposed to look like," Osteen said in a speech to a transparency advocacy group. "We're not supposed to rubber stamp nominees. We're supposed to ensure that the people serving in these positions are qualified, ethical, and committed to serving all Americans, not just their political allies." The legal community was divided. Some praised Osteen for exposing corruption and holding power accountable. Others worried about the precedent of using potentially illegally obtained documents in confirmation hearings. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe weighed in. "While the methods may be controversial, the principle is sound. Public officials should expect their official actions to be scrutinized, especially when they're being considered for higher office." But George Washington University professor Jonathan Turley disagreed. "This was trial by ambush. Whatever Yates's faults, she deserved a fair process, not a theatrical takedown designed for maximum political damage." The Republican response was swift and harsh. They accused those who supported Osteen's actions of weaponizing the confirmation process and promised retaliation when they had the chance. "What goes around comes around," Senator Lindsey Graham warned. "Democrats better hope their nominees are all saints because we'll be looking at everything now." But privately, many Republicans admitted that Yates had been a flawed nominee and that Osteen had simply exposed what should have been caught in the vetting process. "The White House should have known about these issues," one Republican senator said on condition of anonymity. This is what happens when you prioritize loyalty over competence. The impact on Joel Osteen's public standing was transformative. He went from being a celebrated spiritual leader to a national figure in the realm of governmental accountability. Book deals were offered. Speaking engagements poured in, shifting from purely inspirational to often including themes of ethical leadership and transparency. There was even reluctant talk of him running for office, which he consistently dismissed. But Osteen remained focused on his oversight role. "This isn't about me," he insisted in interviews. "This is about ensuring our government works for the people, not for the powerful." He established a new initiative within his nonprofit focused on vetting presidential nominations before they reached the full committee. It became known as the Truth Squad, conducting deep investigations into nominees' backgrounds and making the findings public. The Yates affair also led to new legislation requiring more extensive financial disclosures from nominees and giving Congress greater access to records from their previous government service. The Transparency and Confirmations Act passed with bipartisan support, though many Republicans grumbled about it privately. 6 months later, the Inspector General's report on the allegations against Yates was released. It confirmed many of Osteen's claims, finding systematic prioritization of cases based on political and financial considerations during Yates's tenure in various prosecutorial roles. The report recommended further investigation by the Department of Justice, though it was unclear if any criminal charges would result. Yates attempted a comeback, writing an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled "The Politics of Personal Destruction," in which she accused Osteen and his allies of using McCarthyite tactics to destroy her reputation. But the op-ed was widely panned, even by conservative commentators, for failing to address the specific allegations against her. "She still doesn't get it," wrote conservative columnist David French. "The issue isn't the politics, it's the alleged corruption. Until she addresses that directly, her credibility is shot." The long-term impact on American politics was significant. The Yates-Osteen confrontation became a case study in political science classes. It was analyzed in law schools as an example of congressional oversight power and the role of private citizens in governmental accountability. It was debated in ethics courses as a question of means versus ends. Some argued that Osteen had gone too far, that he had turned confirmation hearings into political theater. Others argued that he had simply done what senators should have been doing all along, thoroughly investigating nominees before confirming them to powerful positions. The confrontation also highlighted the deep divisions in American politics. To the president's supporters, Osteen was a villain who had destroyed a good woman with lies and stolen documents. To the president's opponents, he was a hero who had exposed corruption and stood up to power. These divisions were reflected in the treatment both individuals received afterward. Osteen needed security protection due to death threats. Yates was heckled at public appearances. Both became symbols of the broader political warfare consuming the country. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the standards expected of public officials. The idea that past actions could be hidden or ignored was shattered. The expectation of transparency and accountability was heightened. The willingness of insiders to come forward with information about misconduct increased. "This was a watershed moment," said presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. "It showed that in the age of social media and instant communication, public officials can be held accountable in real time. The old ways of hiding misconduct or hoping it won't come out are over." The legal ramifications continued for years. Several cases that had been dismissed or settled during Yates's tenure as a federal prosecutor were reopened. 2 major donors were eventually convicted of fraud charges that had been dropped while Yates was in a position of influence. One of them, in a plea deal, testified that he had explicitly discussed his case with Yates at a private meeting and received assurances that it would go away. Yates denied these allegations, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. She retreated from public life, taking a position with a small law firm in a quiet town and avoiding media appearances. Her name became synonymous with questions of political corruption and the dangers of pay-to-play justice. Joel Osteen, meanwhile, continued his oversight work. He exposed issues with other nominees, though none as dramatically as the Yates hearing. He became known as one of the most feared figures for any nominee to face, someone whose team prepared extensively to confront. "I don't enjoy destroying people's careers," Osteen said in a later interview, "but I do enjoy protecting the American people from corrupt officials. If that means some uncomfortable confrontations, so be it." The techniques. Osteen pioneered deep investigation through private means, strategic document release, psychological pressure through pacing and timing, became standard practice in how external groups could influence congressional hearings. Training seminars were held for concerned citizens and watchdog groups on the Osteen method. Law schools taught courses on congressional oversight, using the Yates hearing as the primary example. Political scientists debated whether this new aggressive oversight, even from non-governmental actors, was good for democracy. Some argued it would discourage qualified people from serving in government if they knew their every past action would be scrutinized. Others argued it would encourage better behavior from public officials who knew they could be held accountable. The media landscape was also changed by the confrontation. The ratings for the Yates-Osteen Showdown were higher than most presidential debates. Networks began covering confirmation hearings like sporting events, with pre-game analysis, play-by-play commentary, and post-game breakdowns. This had both positive and negative effects. On one hand, more Americans became engaged with the confirmation process and understood its importance. On the other hand, the theatrical nature of the hearings sometimes overshadowed substantive policy discussions. The international impact was also significant. Foreign governments watched the Yates hearing and saw both the strength and vulnerability of American democracy. The ability to hold powerful people accountable was admired. The chaos and division it revealed were concerning. What we saw in that hearing room, wrote a columnist for the London Times, was American democracy at its messiest, but also its most vital. A prominent pastor and businessman, known for his uplifting message, taking down a powerful lawyer backed by the president. It's the kind of accountability that would be impossible in many countries. The psychological impact on both individuals was profound. Osteen later revealed in his memoir that he had to intensify his spiritual practices and personal reflection to deal with the stress and threats that followed the hearing. "I knew I was doing the right thing," he wrote, "but the personal cost was higher than I expected." Yates never wrote a memoir, but friends said she was devastated by the experience. She genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. One friend told a reporter she thought the way she ran her office was normal, how everyone did it. The public humiliation broke her. This raised important questions about the human cost of political accountability. Was it fair to destroy someone's career and reputation so publicly? Was there a better way to handle concerns about nominees? These questions didn't have easy answers. 5 years later, the Yates-Osteen confrontation was still being studied and debated. It had become one of those moments that defined an era, like the McCarthy hearings or Watergate. It was a moment when the system worked or failed, depending on your perspective. Law professors used it to teach about prosecutorial ethics and the importance of independence in law enforcement. Political science professors used it to teach about congressional oversight and the confirmation process. Psychology professors used it to teach about confrontation dynamics and the impact of public humiliation. The confrontation also inspired a new generation of activists and politicians. Young people who watched Osteen take on Yates were inspired to get involved in politics, to challenge power, to demand accountability. Osteen showed us that one person with preparation and courage can make a difference, said a young organizer who started working in politics after watching the hearing. But it also inspired a backlash. Those who saw Yates as a victim of unfair treatment became more committed to fighting what they saw as liberal overreach and non-governmental interference in politics. The divisions exposed by the confrontation didn't heal. If anything, they deepened. The legal reforms that followed were significant but controversial. The Transparency and Confirmations Act required extensive disclosure from nominees, but critics argued it discouraged qualified people from accepting nominations. The new vetting procedures were thorough but time-consuming, leaving important positions vacant for longer periods. The role of congressional oversight was permanently changed. Committees hired more investigators. They demanded more documents. They conducted more extensive pre-hearing investigations. This led to better vetting of nominees, but also longer, more contentious confirmation processes. The media's role in confirmations was also transformed. News organizations assigned teams of investigative reporters to dig into nominees' backgrounds. Opposition research firms boomed as both parties sought dirt on potential nominees. The line between journalism and political warfare became increasingly blurred. 10 years after the confrontation, its legacy was still debated. Had Osteen saved America from a corrupt attorney general? Or had he destroyed an innocent woman for political gain? Had he strengthened democratic accountability? Or had he weaponized the confirmation process? These questions didn't have simple answers. What was clear was that the confrontation had changed American politics permanently. The old gentleman's agreements and unspoken rules were gone, In their place was a more transparent but also more brutal system of accountability. Joel Osteen went on to a distinguished career, continuing his pastoral work alongside his expanded role in public accountability through his foundation. He never apologized for his treatment of Yates, maintaining that he had done what was necessary to protect the integrity of the justice system. "If I had to do it again," he said in an interview on the 10th anniversary of the hearing, "I would do exactly the same thing." Public service is a privilege, not a right. Those who abuse that privilege should be exposed, no matter how painful the process. Lawyer Sally Yates never returned to public life. She practiced law quietly in a small firm, avoiding publicity and declining all interview requests. Friends said she remained bitter about her treatment, but had found peace in private practice. "She's moved on," one friend said, "but she'll never forget what happened in that hearing room. It defined the rest of her life, fairly or not." The broader implications for American democracy remained a subject of debate. Some saw the Yates-Osteen confrontation as a sign of a healthy democracy capable of holding the powerful accountable. Others saw it as a symptom of a democracy tearing itself apart through partisan warfare. What everyone agreed on was that it had been a pivotal moment. In those few hours in a congressional hearing room, something fundamental had shifted in American politics. The old rules were dead. The new rules were still being written. And everyone in public life had to adjust to this new reality where past actions could be exposed at any moment, where accountability could come swiftly and brutally, and where no one was safe from scrutiny. The story of lawyer Sally Yates's dramatic exit from her confirmation hearing after pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author Joel Osteen's document reveal became more than just a political scandal. It became a defining moment in American democracy, a case study in accountability, and a warning to all who would abuse public trust. It showed that in the modern age, with determined investigators and courageous public figures, corruption could be exposed in real time. It demonstrated that even powerful, well-connected nominees could be brought down by their own past actions. It proved that one person with preparation and courage could stand up to power and win. But it also revealed the costs of such confrontations, the human toll, the deepening divisions, the transformation of governance into warfare. It raised questions about justice and fairness, about means and ends, about the price of accountability in a democracy. The image of Sally Yates storming out of that hearing room, her face flushed with rage and humiliation, became iconic. It represented either the triumph of accountability or the tragedy of political destruction, depending on your perspective. The image of Joel Osteen, calmly presenting document after document, unmoved by Yates's anger, became equally iconic. It represented either courageous oversight or ruthless political assassination, depending on your view. These two images, these two individuals, these few hours of confrontation captured something essential about American democracy in the modern era. Its vitality and its viciousness, its accountability and its anger, its promise and its peril. The documents Osteen revealed that day didn't just end Yates's nomination. They changed how America thinks about power, accountability, and justice. They showed that the old ways of doing business, the quiet corruptions, the gentlemen's agreements, the looking the other way, were no longer acceptable. Whether this change was for better or worse remained a matter of debate. But what was undeniable was that it was a change, a fundamental shift in how American democracy operates. The Yates-Osteen confrontation wasn't just a dramatic moment in a congressional hearing room. It was a turning point in American history, and it all started with a folder of documents in a pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author who refused to let corruption slide no matter the consequences. If you've made it through this entire story, you've witnessed one of the most dramatic political confrontations in modern American history. The reverberations of that day in the hearing room are still being felt throughout our government. If you found this deep dive valuable and want to see more in-depth analysis of the political moments that shape our nation, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us continue bringing you the stories behind the headlines, the confrontations that change history, and the truth that powerful people don't want you to know. Remember, democracy depends on citizens who pay attention, who demand accountability, and who refuse to look away when corruption is exposed. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we continue to explore the dramatic moments that define American politics.